The galaxy had lived in peace for centuries. Different species coexisted, their borders clearly marked, and the stars above them seemed like a peaceful sky. But that peace was shattered when the news arrived that a new enemy had entered the galaxy. The Viraxians, a ruthless alien race from a distant star system, had declared war on humanity. They saw the humans as weak, unworthy of the galaxy's attention. And their invasion was planned with only one goal: to crush humanity and take their territory. On Earth, the world's governments had quickly begun to prepare for the worst. Every military leader and strategist had predicted that humans would never stand a chance against the Viraxians. The alien fleet was large, heavily armed, and fast. The human forces, in comparison, seemed tiny and outdated. But what the Viraxians didn't know was that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its numbers, but in its determination. The first Viraxian ships arrived above Earth's orbit, their massive warships casting dark shadows across the planet. Zorkon, the Viraxian warlord who led the invasion, stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching as the city lights of Earth grew closer. His mind was calm, confident. He had conquered worlds far beyond Earth, and this planet was no different. He thought of the human soldiers as mere insects, easily crushed underfoot. "We will burn their cities," Zorkon said to his officers, in a voice that was calm but filled with cruelty. "Their resistance will be short. After that, we take their world, and their technology will be ours." His officers nodded in agreement, all certain of their victory. They had faced many species before, each of them proving weak in comparison to the mighty Viraxians. But none of them were prepared for what lay ahead. On Earth, the human military had readied its defenses. The world's military forces had worked together, pooling their resources. But it was clear they were underprepared for what was coming. Their weapons, though powerful, could not match the alien technology descending from the skies. Missiles lined the borders, fighter jets filled the skies, and soldiers stood ready to defend their cities, but they all knew the truth. They had never faced an enemy like this before. General Ryan Thompson, one of the top commanders of the human forces, paced back and forth in the underground command center. His mind was racing. He knew the Viraxians were coming, but no one could predict what the aliens would do first. Would they bombard the cities with lasers? Would they send down waves of soldiers to crush humanity in an instant? Thompson had seen many battles, but this felt different. The weight of the situation hung in the air, thick with tension. He couldn't help but think about his family, his wife, his young daughter, the millions of others who depended on the safety of this planet. But just as he was about to give an order to launch the first strike, a soft ping sounded on his console. He turned to see a message coming through from a special unit stationed at the outskirts of the battle zone. "General Thompson," the message began. "We have eyes on the enemy. They're in range. What do we do now?" Thompson leaned forward, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. There was no going back now. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his chest. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew one thing: humans would fight. They would not go down without a fight. He pressed the button to respond. "Prepare for the worst," he said, his voice steady. "All units stand by. We will defend this world." Sergeant Marcus was one of those soldiers. He had trained for years, learning how to become one of the best snipers humanity had ever known. He wasn't just good with a rifle, he was precise. His training had been rigorous, and his skills had been honed in the harshest conditions. While the rest of the world panicked, he knew exactly what to do. Stay calm. Stay focused, he whispered to himself as he adjusted the scope on his rifle. This is what we've trained for. He looked out over the battlefield, his eyes narrowing as the Viraxian forces began to land. He knew the alien invaders didn't understand the power of human precision. They thought of humans as weak, fragile creatures, unprepared for war. They had no idea that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt and fight back against impossible odds. As the first Viraxian soldier stepped onto the battlefield, unaware of the danger lurking nearby, Sergeant Marcus took a deep breath. The fate of the world rested on his shoulders, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The air was tense as the Viraxian ships continued to rain fire down on Earth's surface. Cities that had stood for centuries were now nothing more. then ruins, burning under the unrelenting assault. People fled in all directions, trying to escape the destruction. But amidst the chaos, there was a different kind of preparation happening in secret. Sergeant Marcus stood in a small, hidden military base, deep in the mountains, far from the front lines. It was a place that few knew about, designed to remain hidden from enemy eyes. Inside the base, the human forces were working on something special, something that could turn the tide of the war. It wasn't a bomb or a missile. It wasn't some new weapon of mass destruction. No, it was far simpler and far more deadly. Marcus stood before a long metal table where a strange, sleek rifle lay. It looked like a regular sniper rifle, but it was anything but ordinary. The weapon had been designed in secret by some of the best human engineers and scientists, and it was capable of firing a single shot with incredible precision, no matter the target. It was called the Horizon, and it was humanity's secret weapon. "Is it ready?" Marcus asked, as he stepped closer to the rifle, his eyes scanning its smooth surface. "Yes, sir," said Corporal Jenkins, one of the engineers working on the weapon. "This sniper rifle is unlike anything the Vraxians have ever seen. It's built to adapt, to fire at targets even the best sensors can't detect. We've tested it. It can kill with one shot, no matter the distance." Marcus nodded, but there was no excitement in his eyes. He had seen too much death, too much destruction, to feel anything but duty. He picked up the rifle carefully and checked the settings. "Let's make sure it works when we need it," he said. The Horizon wasn't just a powerful rifle. It was humanity's, a symbol of hope in the midst of a war they could never have prepared for. Marcus had been trained to use it, just as his fellow soldiers had been trained to support him. Each of them knew what their mission was: to slow the enemy, weaken their forces, and give the rest of humanity a chance to fight back. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the Varaxians were feeling the heat. Zorkon, their commander, watched from his ship as the human forces seemed to defy every expectation. His forces had already destroyed several human cities, but something was wrong. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't panicking. They were fighting back with strange precision, like they had a secret no one knew about. "We need to finish this quickly," Zorkon growled, slamming his fist against the control panel. "Deploy the shock troops. I want every city reduced to rubble by nightfall." The Varaxian shock troops were the toughest soldiers in their army, trained for brutal, close combat and heavy assaults. They would be sent in to crush any human resistance in the cities still standing. But Zorkon didn't understand. The humans weren't just relying on their numbers. They had something far more dangerous: strategy. The small teams of human snipers had already begun to pick off high-value targets, taking out commanders and soldiers from a distance. It was a deadly game, one the Varaxians had never played before. Sergeant Marcus and his team were stationed on a nearby mountain range, their rifles aimed at the approaching Varaxian forces. It was time to put the Horizon to the test. "Focus," Marcus said softly to his team, his voice steady. "Our job is simple. Take out the Varaxian commanders. We need to keep their leaders from organizing the shock troops." One of the snipers, Private Daniels, gave a quick nod. "Got it, sir." The soldiers moved into position, each finding their spot. With military precision, they were the best of the best, and they knew how to remain invisible. Even the Vraxians, with all their advanced technology, couldn't see them. From his position, Marcus could see the shock troops marching below. They were massive, armored, and terrifying. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had faced worse than this. He looked through the scope of his rifle, his fingers steady as he aimed for the first Targetan alien officer riding at the front of the group. One shot, Marcus thought. One chance. The rifle hummed softly as he pulled the trigger. The shot was almost silent, but the result was unmistakable. The alien officer's head exploded in a burst of red. The shock troops froze, momentarily confused, as the officer crumpled to the ground. "Target down," Marcus said calmly, adjusting his scope. "Next, target." The team worked quickly, each sniper picking off their targets from different angles, taking down Vraxian officers and commanders one by one. The alien troops were thrown into chaos, unable to fight back against an invisible enemy. The Viraxians were strong, but they were not prepared for the strategy of the humans, who knew how to use their environment to their advantage. But Marcus knew this wouldn't last forever. The Viraxians would adapt. They had to. The humans were outnumbered, and every shot they took was a risk. Zorkan watched from his ship as his soldiers began to panic. His officers scrambled to find answers, but the humans were already several steps ahead. They had become the hunters, and the Viraxians, the hunted. "We cannot let this go on, Zorkan," muttered under his breath. "Prepare the retaliation force. We will make them regret underestimating us." But as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that this war was not going to be as easy as he had hoped. He had expected the humans to fold quickly, to surrender before the might of the Vracian Empire. But instead they were showing a resilience he had never imagined. Back on the ground, Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving his scope. His team continued to fire, but with each shot, he knew that the war was far from over. The real battle had only just begun. The war had raged on for days, and Earth's cities were quickly becoming ruins. The Viraxian forces, though powerful, seemed unable to defeat humanity's resilience. The aliens had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, and now they were learning that humans would not give up easily. Sergeant Marcus and his team of snipers continued to strike from the shadows, taking down alien commanders and high-ranking officers with deadly accuracy. Each shot fired from the horizon, sniper rifles echoed in the alien ranks, causing confusion and fear among their soldiers. The Viraxian troops couldn't fight what they couldn't see, and this was beginning to frustrate their commander Zorkan. Zorkan stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his troops struggle. He had ordered everything from heavy bombardments to ground assaults, yet the humans remained a constant, invisible threat. He couldn't understand how they fought so fiercely. With so few resources, the Viraxians were used to sweeping victories. But this war was turning into something they weren't prepared for. He took a deep breath, steadying his rifle. His fingers were calm, trained for this moment. One shot was all it would take. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, a quiet, almost invisible movement of deadly precision. The Viraxian officer's head snapped back, and he fell to the ground, never knowing what hit him. "Target down," Marcus whispered into his his voice calm but sharp. "We've got more coming in from the north." The team moved quickly there. Movements synchronized. Private Daniels, one of the younger snipers in the unit, had just taken out another alien officer when he noticed something. The Viraxians were changing tactics. "They're retreating," Daniels said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The shock troops, they're pulling back." Marcus didn't answer right away. He was busy scanning the battlefield through his scope. It was true. The Viraxians, who had once seemed unstoppable, were now withdrawing from the front lines. "They're regrouping," Marcus said slowly. "Something's going on. They're not retreating. They're planning something bigger." Back on the alien ships, Zorkan was growing impatient. He had ordered his troops to prepare for a massive counteroffensive. He would crush the humans and show them the full force of the Viraxian Empire. His officers scrambled to follow orders, and the alien ships began to charge up their weapons for another assault. But deep down, Zorkan knew something was wrong. The humans were different. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Their resistance wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. Zorkan had never faced an enemy like that before. As the Viraxians prepared their weapons for another attack, Marcus and his team moved into position. They knew that this could be their most dangerous mission yet. If the Viraxians were about to unleash everything they had, the humans would need to strike first before the aliens could bring their full might to bear. "We need to stop them from launching that counterattack," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "Everyone, hold your positions. We've got to take out their weapons command center. If we can disable their ability to fire, we might have a chance." Snipers moved silently, crawling through the ruins of the city. The streets were empty, the sounds of destruction echoing in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of burning debris and smoke. But the humans moved forward with purpose. They were ready. Marcus and his team had learned how to strike swiftly and then disappear before the enemy could react. It was the perfect strategy for a force outnumbered by an enemy so much stronger. They would hit hard and fast, leaving nothing behind but confusion. They reached the Viraxian command center within hours. It was a heavily guarded structure surrounded by alien soldiers. But Marcus wasn't worried. He knew his team was ready. They had trained for this. And in this war, precision was more valuable than brute strength. On my signal, Marcus whispered, his fingers resting on the trigger. Take out the guards, then hit the control center. We're going for the core. Snipers moved quickly, taking down the guards with the deadly accuracy they were known for. One by one, the alien soldiers fell. No screams, no confusion, just the sound of silent death. Marcus, using his sniper rifle, shot the lock on the command center's entrance. The team quickly moved inside, and with a few well-placed shots, they disabled the Viraxian weapon systems. The counteroffensive was stopped in its tracks. The battle had shifted. The humans had made their first significant move against the Viraxian forces. And it was one they would not forget. The humans had done the unthinkable. In a matter of days, they had struck fear into the hearts of the Viraxian invaders, forcing them to pause and rethink their plans. Zorkon, the ruthless commander of the Viraxian fleet, could no longer deny the truth. The humans were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting with a purpose that made them more dangerous than anything the Viraxians had encountered before. The war had shifted, and now it was clear. Humans had an advantage that the Viraxians couldn't match: their ability to adapt. The aliens had underestimated the humans' tactical brilliance, and that mistake was proving to be costly. Zorkon stood in the center of his command ship, his eyes locked on the holographic map of Earth. The map was now covered in red marks, indicating where his forces had lost battles. But it was the areas where the humans had struck the hardest that concerned him the most. The Viraxian military had lost key positions, and the humans had learned how to strike at their weakest points. They are not like the other species we have conquered, Zorkon muttered to himself, frustration clear in his voice. They don't break easily. They adapt too quickly. Commander Rilke, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. Sir, we have a new report from the front lines. The human snipers have taken out several of our supply lines. They've destroyed 2 of our main ammunition depots. Zorkon's fist slammed into the table. Cannot let them keep hitting us like this. We must crush them now before they become an even greater threat. Back on Earth, the situation was dire. The human forces had learned quickly from their encounters with the Viraxians, and now they were using that knowledge to strike with precision. The snipers, led by Sergeant Marcus, had taken down Viraxian officers, weapon systems, and even supply lines. Every shot was a calculated move. Each one brought the humans closer to victory. Sergeant Marcus sat in a quiet command room, his eyes focused on the map before him. His team of snipers had been busy, taking out Viraxian commanders and attacking their weak points. It wasn't easy, and the pressure was building. The Viraxians were starting to adapt, but Marcus had no intention of letting them regain control. All right, listen up, Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with determination. We've made them bleed, but we can't stop now. They're starting to regroup. The next phase is going to be tougher, but we have something they don't have. Time? The room was silent as his team gathered around, listening carefully. Marcus was right. The Viraxians might have better technology and stronger weapons, but the humans had time on their side. The Viraxians were rushing to end the war quickly, but the humans had already begun to outlast them. The longer the battle continued, the more difficult it would be for the Viraxians to maintain their advantage. We'll hit their command centers next, Marcus continued. If we take out their leadership, the rest of the Viraxian forces will fall apart. We can break their morale, and they'll retreat. The plan was simple, but it was dangerous. Marcus knew that every mission carried a risk. The Viraxians had begun to employ stronger tactics, sending in hunters specifically trained to track down human snipers. These new tactics would make it harder for the humans to stay hidden and strike from the shadows, but the humans had adapted to. They had learned from their mistakes and were now more prepared than ever. The team split up, each sniper heading to their designated loca. Taeon, their mission was clear: Find and eliminate the Viraxian commanders. The Viraxian stronghold was located in the heart of a once bustling city, now reduced to rubble. The city was crawling with alien soldiers, but it was also the most important target they had. As Marcus moved through the ruins, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his team. They had come so far, and they were now striking fear into the hearts of the Viraxians. The aliens had expected an easy victory, but instead, they had found themselves facing an enemy that fought with everything they had. "This is it," Marcus whispered to himself as he set up his rifle. "We can end this." From his position, he had a perfect view of the Viraxian command center. His fingers were steady as he adjusted the scope of his rifle. The shot had to be perfect. He knew that if he missed, it would be his last chance. He took a deep breath and fired. The shot rang out, and in an instant, the Viraxian commander crumpled to the ground. The aliens standing nearby looked around in confusion, unsure of what had happened. Panic began to spread through their ranks as they realized that their leadership had just been taken down. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that the Viraxians would retaliate, and he had to keep moving. The humans had no choice but to stay one step ahead, always striking when the enemy least expected it. As he moved toward the next target, Marcus knew the war was far from over. But the Viraxians had learned a harsh lesson. Humans weren't as weak as they had believed. And with each passing day, the Viraxians would realize that their plan for a quick victory was slipping further and further from their grasp. Back on the alien ship, Zorkan watched as his soldiers struggled to regain control. His once confident demeanor had begun to crack, and the fear of failure was growing stronger with each passing hour. "Send in the second wave," Zorkan ordered, his voice tense. "We will not let these humans defeat us." But Zorkan knew the truth. The humans had something the Viraxians could never understand. They had hope, a fighting spirit that refused to die. And that made them the most dangerous. His eyes were narrowed, his fists clenched in anger. Zorkan had underestimated the humans, and now he had to pay the price. But he wasn't a leader. Who would give up easily? The humans had already proven themselves to be worthy opponents, but Zorkan had a plan. It was time to bring in his elite forces, the shock troopers. These soldiers were the Viraxian military's most feared warriors. They were larger, stronger, and more vicious than the average soldier. They had been trained for hand-to-hand combat and could take down entire armies with their sheer strength and skill. If anyone could turn the tide of the war, it would be the shock troopers. "Prepare the shock troopers for deployment," Zorkan ordered. "This will end today." For the Viraxians would retaliate with everything they had. He sat in the command room, his mind racing as he thought about the next steps. The snipers had done well, but their ammunition was running low, and the Viraxians were learning from their mistakes. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the Viraxians were preparing something big. "We need to prepare for the worst," Marcus said, his voice steady but urgent. "The Viraxians won't let this go on for much longer. We need to stay one step ahead." Private Daniels, one of the younger snipers, nodded. "I've heard rumors. They're sending in their elite shock troopers. They're supposed to be nearly unstoppable." Marcus's expression hardened. The shock troopers were a force to be reckoned with. If they arrived on Earth, it would change everything. The snipers had been effective because they could strike from a distance, using stealth and precision. But the shock troopers would close that gap, forcing the humans into direct combat. "We'll have to adjust," Marcus said, his eyes focused. "We can't outrun them, but we can outsmart them. Let's get to work." As the team prepared, the first wave of shock troopers was deployed. The ground shook as their massive warships landed. On Earth, kicking up dust and debris, the troopers emerged, their heavy armor gleaming in the sunlight, their eyes filled with fury. These soldiers were made for one thing: to destroy. Zorkan watched from his flagship as the shock troopers advanced. "Let them feel the full power of the Viraxians," he said, his voice cold and commanding. The troopers stormed the battlefield, clearing any human resistance in their path. The humans, once so confident in their advantage, now found themselves fighting. For their survival, the shock troopers were relentless, tearing through human defenses with ease. There was no way to stop them with conventional weapons. But Marcus wasn't going to let the humans fall so easily. He knew the only way to defeat the shock troopers was to take out their leader. If the troopers lost their commander, they would lose their coordination. If they lost that, they would be just as vulnerable as any other soldier. "We need to find their commander," Marcus said, his voice firm. "If we can take out the leader, the shock troopers will fall apart." The team moved quickly, using the same tactics that had worked so well in the past. They hid in the shadows, always moving, always watching. They knew the Viraxians had set up patrols to hunt them down, but Marcus and his team had learned to be ghosts on the battlefield. Troopers may have been stronger, but they were not as fast or as quiet as the humans. After hours of moving through the ruins of the city, the team finally located the shock trooper commander. He stood atop a platform, barking orders to his soldiers. His armor was different from the others, larger, more intimidating. He was a giant among giants, a true leader of his people. "This is it," Marcus whispered into his cum. "We take him out, and the rest of the troopers will scatter. Aim for the weak points in his armor." Snipers moved into position, each taking cover in different locations. They could see the commander's movements, the way he directed his troops, small gaps in his armor that could be exploited. It was their best chance. "On my mark," Marcus said, his finger on the trigger. The team synchronized their shots, each sniper taking aim at a different point on the commander's armor. In perfect unison, they fired. The commander didn't even have a chance to react. The first shot hit him in the chest, puncturing his armor and sending him crashing to the ground. The second shot took out his helmet, and the third shot hit his leg, disabling him completely. The shock troopers froze, confused and disoriented. Without their leader, they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The human snipers had struck. The tide of the battle had shifted once again. Marcus and his team moved quickly, taking out the remaining troopers with ease. The once mighty Viraxian shock troops were now in disarray, their morale shattered. Without their commander, they were just another enemy to be defeated. Zorkon watched in disbelief as the shock troopers faltered. His elite soldiers, once thought invincible, were now retreating. The humans had done it again. This war, Commander. Rilke, his most trusted officer, approached with a report. "Sir, our spies have discovered something troubling. The humans are gathering for Sismal, but they are using their resources carefully. It seems they're preparing for something big." Zorkon stopped pacing and turned sharply to face Rilke. "What do you mean something big?" Rilke hesitated, but then continued. "The human snipers are targeting our supply lines again. They're cutting off our resources one by one. If we don't act quickly, we could be out of ammunition within days. They're crippling us from the inside." Zorkon's eyes narrowed and he exhaled sharply. "Then we stop them now. If we can destroy their snipers, we destroy their advantage." Zorchan knew that the humans had used their environment to gain the upper hand. They had been unpredictable, always one step ahead. But Zorkon believed he had the key to ending this. He ordered the deployment of a special Viraxian unit, one that was different from anything the humans had faced before. These soldiers were not as powerful as the shock troopers, but they were swift and silent, trained to track and eliminate even the most elusive targets. "They are called the Phantom Hunters," Zorkon said, his voice cold and determined. "Deploy them immediately. They are the only ones who can locate and neutralize the human snipers." Back on Earth, Marcus sat with his team in a small hidden bunker. They had been moving from one location to another, striking when they could, disappearing when they needed to. The humans were adapting, learning how to fight back against the Viraxian invaders. But Marcus could sense that the Viraxians weren't done yet. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the soldiers they had killed, and he had heard the reports of the shock troopers retreating. "The Viraxians are scared," Marcus said, breaking the silence in the room. "They've never faced a challenge like this." "Ash!" Private Daniels, one of the youngest snipers in the unit, looked up from the map. "What do you mean, sir?" Marcus paused, scanning the map in front of him. "The Viraxians don't know how to fight like us. We use our brains more than our strength. But I think they've realized that. They'll send in their best trackers. They'll try to find us, flush us out, and take us down before we do more damage. The team fell silent, knowing the truth of Marcus's words. They had been operating freely until now, but the Viraxians were learning. Soon they would be the ones hunted. We need to stay ahead, Marcus said. We'll set traps. We'll be faster, and we'll make sure they can't find us. The team prepared quickly. They moved into position, setting up strategic locations that would allow them to attack and retreat if necessary. They knew the Viraxians would come for them. They always did. But the humans had learned how to survive, how to adapt, and how to use the enemy's own strength against them. Hours passed, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Marcus had his eyes on the forest where the Viraxian phantom hunters were rumored to be. His heart raced, but his body remained still, focused. He knew that one wrong move could end the mission and possibly cost them their lives. Suddenly, a crackling sound came through the cums. It was faint, but Marcus recognized it. The phantom hunters were closing in. "Stay calm," Marcus whispered into his mic. "They're coming. Wait for my signal." The team took their positions in silence, blending into the shadows, their eyes trained on the approaching danger. The Viraxian hunters were skilled, but they weren't the only ones who knew how to move quietly in the wilderness. The humans had the advantage of experiencers of living in a world where silence and stealth were often a matter of life or death. Marcus's breath slowed as he focused on the target ahead. Through his scope, he saw the first of the phantom hunters, their dark uniforms blending with the environment. They were moving with precision, their eyes scanning the surroundings, aware that the humans were close. But unable to see them, Marcus watched for a moment, calculating the best course of action. He knew they couldn't wait forever. The longer they stayed hidden, the more time the Viraxians would have to regroup and call for reinforcements. It was time to make their move. "Now," Marcus whispered. In a flash, the snipers fired. One by one, the phantom hunters fell, taken by surprise. Each shot was clean, precise. The Viraxians didn't even know what hit them. But they were quick learners, and the remaining hunters began to scatter, trying to find the humans who had just eliminated their comrades. "We've got them on the run," Daniel said, his voice low, but filled with adrenaline. "Let's finish this," Marcus nodded. "Stay sharp, they won't stop coming." As the last of the phantom hunters were eliminated, the team moved quickly, leaving the area before the Viraxians could regroup. They knew that the battle was far from over. The Viraxians were relentless, and they would return with a vengeance. But for now, the humans had won another victory. Back in space, Zorkon gritted his teeth in frustration. His phantom hunters had failed. The humans had once again proven that they were more than capable of outsmarting his forces. "They will pay for this," Zorkon growled. "Deploy every available unit. This war ends now." But even Zorkon could not deny the truth. No matter how many troops he sent, the humans were not like any enemy he had faced before. And as long as the humans fought with their full strength and their will to survive, victory was never guaranteed. The war had reached a critical point. The Viraxians, once so sure of their victory, were now desperate. They had sent wave after wave of soldiers, each one more determined than the last, but the humans refused to break. Sergeant Marcus and his team had proven time and again that no matter how powerful the Viraxians were, the humans would never surrender. They had become a force to be reckoned with. Zorkon paced the bridge of his flagship, frustration boiling inside him. His fleet had suffered major losses, and his shock troopers had failed. The phantom hunters, his last hope of hunting down the human snipers, had been outsmarted. The humans had proven more resilient, more cunning than he had ever imagined. How are they doing this? Zorkon muttered to himself. How can they keep fighting when they're outnumbered? Why haven't they given up? His officers stood in silence, unwilling to answer. They had no answers. No matter how many tactics they tried, no matter how many reinforcements they sent, the humans had adapted and outmaneuvered them every time. "We can't keep fighting like this," Zorkon finally said, his voice cold and filled with defeat. "Prepare the fleet for a final assault. We'll push through their defenses with everything we have. We'll show them that we are the true rulers of this galaxy." On Earth, Marcus, was preparing for the next phase of their mission. Had retreated for now, but everyone knew it wouldn't last. Zorkon would strike again, and when he did, it would be with all his remaining strength. The humans had to be ready. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, gathering his team. "The Viraxians will be back soon, and we need to strike before they do. We've hit their leadership, their weapon systems, and their supply lines. But Zorkon is still out there, and he's not going to stop until he's crushed us." The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had been through a lot already, but the stakes had never been higher. The Viraxians would soon return, and Marcus knew that this time it had to end. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. If they didn't finish the job now, they might not get another chance. "We'll go after Zorkan himself," Marcus said. "We take out their leader, and the rest will fall apart. We've already crippled their army, but this is the final step. If we end this war, we give humanity the chance to survive." The snipers went to work, preparing their weapons and their equipment for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. They would track Zorkon, find his position, and eliminate him before he could launch his final assault. If they succeeded, the Viraxian invasion would come to an end. If they failed, humanity's chances of survival would be gone. Hours later, Marcus and his team were deep in Viraxian territory. They had managed to track Zorkan's movements to an abandoned military base on the outskirts of the city. The area was heavily guarded, and the air was thick with tension. The Viraxians knew they were close, and they were doing everything they could to protect their leader. "Stay low and stay quiet," Marcus whispered to his team. "We get one shot at this. If we miss, Zorkan will know we're here, and it'll be all over." They moved through the shadows, careful not to alert the Viraxians to their presence. Every step was measured, every movement calculated. The human snipers had trained for this moment, and now it was time to put everything they had learned into practice. As they neared Zorkan's command center, Al-Such could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders. He knew the risks. If they were caught, it could mean the end of the war for humanity. But if they succeeded, they would end the invasion once and for all. Through the scope of his rifle, Marcus spotted Zorkan. He was surrounded by his top officers, completely unaware that the humans were closing in on him. The alien commander stood tall, his armor gleaming in the dim light, barking orders to his troops. Marcus steadied his breath. This was the moment. The shot had to be perfect. "On my mark," Marcus whispered into the comms. 3, 2, 1. The snipers fired. Zorkan didn't have time to react. The first shot hit him in the chest, knocking him back. The second shot took out his shoulder, rendering him immobile. The third shot hit his helmet, shattering it into pieces. The once mighty Viraxian commander crumpled to the ground, dead before he even had a chance to draw his weapon. The Viraxians around him froze in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Their leader, their greatest strength, was gone. Panic spread through the ranks, and without Zorkan to command them, the Viraxians lost their cohesion. The soldiers scattered, unsure of what to do next. "We've done it," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Marcus didn't reply right away. His eyes were focused on the Viraxian soldiers, watching them break apart without their leader's orders. The humans had done what they needed to do, but the war was far from over. The Viraxians would regroup, they would fight again, but for now, they had won. Back on the Viraxian flagship, Zorkan's death was felt immediately. The officers stood in stunned silence as the news spread. The commander who had led them to this point was gone. The ship, once full of confidence, now felt like a tomb. Zorkan's second in command stood before the Viraxian council, his eyes cold. "The humans have struck at the heart of our fleet. We must retaliate. But this time, we fight to win. We will show them what it truly means to challenge the Viraxian Empire." But deep down, the officers knew something had changed. The humans had faced overwhelming odds and won, and in that moment, the Viraxians realized that they were not just fighting for Earth, they were fighting for their very survival.